I spent 2 decades as a Fortune 500 head of HR sitting in the rooms where promotions were decided. I'm Courtney O'Connell, and I'm bringing you inside the promotion room. Today, inside the promotion room, I sit down with Michael Kubit, who is a former chief information officer who spent decades leading large-scale transformation inside complex university systems. You might expect a conversation with a former CIO to focus on technology, AI, and digital transformation. And while we did go there, what surprised me most was how quickly the conversation shifted from technology to humanity. Michael shares why leadership is something people should feel, why executive presence has far less to do with confidence than most people think, and why leaders who rise are not always the one with the most pedigreed resume. If you've ever wondered what separates someone who simply does great work from someone who is trusted to lead at the higher levels, I think you're going to get a lot out of this conversation. Here's my chat with former CIO Michael Kubit. Michael, welcome to the promotion room.
Glad to be here, Courtney.
Yeah, really excited to have you. Before we get into everything, I like to start at the very beginning. Tell me about where are you from? Where did you grow up? And what did you want to be when you were a little boy?
Wow, that's a good question. Okay, so grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, sort of suburbs south of the city. Boy, what did I want to be? I don't know that I actually can remember that far back, quite honestly.
You let life's wind pull you along and inspire you as you went.
Well, that's it. Yeah. And I think that may tie into sort of our conversation today is this opportunity sort of navigation versus sort of intentionality, and sort of life happens. And are we building enough resilience to sort of navigate those things as they come our way, and in many ways manifest sort of the best version of ourselves in the process?
My gosh, all of it. So then give us the Cliff Notes version. Walk us through what you went to school, tell us what you studied, and then just give us kind of the highlights of your career.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I was definitely sort of the non-traditional student. I did not pay as much attention, we'll say, in high school as one might think is someone wanting to go to university. So I went to community college. Spent 2 years at the time. My dad had lost his job, so I had to interrupt my career. I was in a program that it was going to allow me to go to a 4-year university after a 2-year community college. And so started working, actually maintenance in a hotel. As I said, my dad had lost his job. He had gotten laid off, so I needed to help out with sort of family finances. Did that for a few years and actually didn't go back and finish my bachelor's degree, sort of fast forwarding until my wife at the time was pregnant with my second child. So I think I finished when I was like 28, went back to get my master's degree sort of my early 40s. So definitely a non-traditional student in a lot of ways, but also shows taking opportunities as they present themselves.
Yeah. So you're working maintenance in a hotel as a young. Tell us about your learnings there. What did you learn about yourself?
I think there were some sort of tangible benefits. And I think some of that sort of carried over professionally as well with the same type of approach. Like, look, if I understand how something's supposed to work and it's not working, what approach can I take to help fix that, if I can use that term?
Do you think that that's partially what led you into IT?
I think it was tangential. Music is actually probably what got me into IT. So I played music in a band early in high school and through my mid-20s, and got involved with all the sound equipment, the technology that was associated with live performing, studio performing at that time. And there was an opportunity at a university in Cleveland where they needed a video engineer to come in and actually maintain what were at the time 2-inch tape reel machines when they're health sciences college. So so that was sort of the entry. And so in some ways I kind of laugh. I was like in IT before there was such a thing.
Well, it's nonstop. I mean, technology just continues to evolve. Of course, now we're in the age of AI and reinventing what work looks like. I'd love your thoughts on the idea of retooling. We call it the age of AI. I mean, that's what we're calling it today. In 5-10 years, it's going to be something else. But we know the tech evolution will forever change how we look at the world of work. So what's your take on what are those skills that you would pay attention to if you were mid-career today and staring at the changes that are happening?
Yeah, it's interesting. No, it's a good question. It brings up so many things. I mean, even from a background perspective, I think a lot of companies are still trying to figure out exactly what they're going to do with AI and how AI is going to improve the quality of their services. And quite honestly, and not to sound cynical or maybe showing my age, but this reminds me of a number of tech innovations that we've seen in the past where this is the greatest thing. It's going to revolutionize everything. It's going to change everything. And in some cases it did. And in some cases, or I say many cases it did, but it took a lot longer. So thinking about your audience there and thinking about leadership, right, and leadership skills, and sort of the first answer that wants to come to mind for me is leadership. To me, is an emotion. A mentor of mine, a colleague of mine, once told me that people need to feel your leadership. That's not something that can really be replicated by AI. And I think the best leaders are able to connect with individuals, with groups across different settings and feel pretty comfortable. So we use that term sort of executive presence. I don't know that I like that word, but no, I think honing what we've called soft skills, which in my opinion are a lot more difficult to master than basically tools that we pull out of a toolbox. But it's really understanding ourselves, understanding our own emotions, understanding our buttons and our triggers, understanding how to lead a group without having to be at the center of that conversation or feeling that we have to be the smartest person in the room, how to communicate. People evaluate our value as a leader, as a person based on their perception. What are we doing to sort of influence their perception of us as an individual or as a leader?
Yeah, I talk a lot about that perception because I can tell you, I never thought about my perception until I was mid-career. It never crossed my mind. I was probably pushing 40 the first time I really thought about deliberately making sure that I was coming across and making an impression that was deliberate instead of just because I, like you, let the wind just carry a lot of my career. And I was lucky enough that the wind was blowing in the directions. And I happened to be in the place at the time with the people to get opportunities. And that's lucky. And there came a point in my career where I had to become more deliberate about how I was showing up, what my next moves were going to be. So tell me about some of the instances in your career, because I know you were at several university systems. Like I mentioned, I know you left your career at the CIO level, so you clearly were doing something deliberately or not. And I'd love to just hear more about what you attribute that success to.
No, it is. The concept was presented to me at one point in my career about what is your brand, about thinking of yourself as a brand, and what does your brand sort of stand for? And so when people say your name or think about you, do they identify you with whatever brand you want to associate with? So I thought that was good sort of advice or sort of good reframing when we think about ourselves. And is that what I want my brand to stand for? Or is that the kind of reputation do I want to have? That just sort of prompts another thought. So is really the good of the team, the good of the organization outweighs the needs of the one. And where I saw this a lot in my career was that someone who was really brilliant, was good at their job, but was just super toxic to the team, to where nobody else was really able to perform sort of the level they were capable of. And the excuse is always, well, we can't get rid of this person because they're really smart. And my response has always been to that. It's like, but everyone else is watching. And if you refuse to act on an individual that's either not performing or really not contributing or not being part of the team, recognizing that you're causing more damage than the short term of, well, this person is kind of helping us in the immediate.
Right. And I think leaders need to understand it's that sets the culture. So the culture is not the values that are hung on the wall or on our website. The culture is what we tolerate. Right. And when we tolerate a toxic person, that is now the culture and the environment that we're in. And A players will not stay in an environment where that is the case. And so as we think about company culture or organizational culture, you and I share in that we moved organizations throughout our career for one reason or another. And I was curious if you could talk a little bit about how you knew when it was time to go. What came up for you that told you, okay, Michael, this is now the time to pivot out and look for something specific. So this really goes to the deliberation. Now we're no longer being swept by the wind that has always been at our back. Now it's, I'm going to make a choice because of something I'm recognizing.
Sure. Yeah, I can give you sort of two instances. One a little farther back in my career, I was really working at deputy CIO level. So really one step career-wise from where I was wanting to move, which was in that chair of vice president or CIO at a college university. The advice I was given is like, apply anyway, practice. Give yourself the opportunity to see how you present. Give yourself an opportunity to really see how you can improve your resume or your CV, how you can improve your cover letter, how you can improve your interviewing skills. And so at the time, I thought it was a bit disingenuous, quite honestly, because I really had no intention of moving. But the person that I had talked to sort of assured me that there was sort of no real issue with that. So after about 2 years, I landed a vice president position at one of the largest universities in the country, and that really prompted a move. It was quite a step advance from where I was, but it was where I kind of saw myself moving beyond that. I think it was sort of a recognition that although I was brought in to sort of lead a transformation, that institution was not willing to do what was really necessary to pursue that transformation and ultimately save sort of the taxpayers and the tuition dollars in the tens of millions. So it was really time to move on.
Yeah. We are seeing a lot of these gouges in organizations to make room. And so when we think about the retooling necessary and the human skills, you mentioned communicating well. This is why so many of us are out here doing what we're doing to really help people understand what does excellent communication actually mean. Which brings me back to this whole notion of executive presence. And like you, I don't love the term, and it is still ubiquitous, and people are getting the feedback all over the place. You're doing great. Just work on your executive presence. And they don't know what that means. They want to continue to grow and develop, and their bosses are not even able to articulate, here's specifically what I mean there. So what advice do you give for those folks out there who are hearing or who intuitively want to work on executive presence? What does it mean to you? What does it look like when you see it? What does it feel like when you see it?
Yeah. You mentioned communication earlier, and I think one of the things we have to remember about communications is communicating is sending and receiving messages. And I think oftentimes we forget as leaders, we do lots of talking, but not a lot of listening, which leads to the next aspect of that is we have two ears and one mouth for a reason. I always thought that usually one of the last people to speak are usually the one that has some wisdom in what they say. And I think this is a big, kind of diving into this a little bit, Courtney, when I think about when I spent a couple decades sort of training folks that were transitioning from like individual contributors to like managers. Yeah. And typically that's how we reward people. Someone who's really good at their job, what do? We offer them a management position. Do we offer them any sort of skills and what it means to lead people as opposed to manage things? No. And so hence your podcast and ones like it. But I think the biggest challenge for folks is that when you're an individual contributor, you're measured by your individual contribution. And that's what basically will get that door open, is how you perform. However, when you get into that role of leading people, it's no longer about your success. It's about the success of your team. And that your success as a manager is actually measured by how successful your team is. And that's a really difficult transition. And I've been in with other CIOs, vice presidents for IT of similar institutions, and they actually believe that their job was supposed to be the smartest person in the room. And this is at an institution of higher learning. And so where you can basically shake a stick at folks that would be more intellectually capable than any one of us. Anyhow, so I think that's important, is sort of, how do you celebrate the success of your team? How do you build trust? So one of the books that I really like, I think Lencioni is 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And not to steal the punchline, in which he really sort of gives, I think, great evidence as to strong teams are built on trust. The ability to ask for help, the ability to admit a weakness, the ability to sort of admit a mistake. And as a leader...
Conflict. And have conflict. That's
exactly.
The second. It's trust, and then it's conflict. And people just so naturally averse to conflict. But when there is trust, that's healthy. We need to have different perspectives. And then, of course, then we move beyond. We make a decision point and move forward.
Exactly. So as a leader, how do you facilitate that? And so one of the things I've had this sort of shift, not only in my life, but as a leader, is that I'll be vulnerable when I trust you. And as the leader I'm going to prove that I'm vulnerable in order to build trust amongst the team, in order to model that vulnerability. So getting back to like AI and thinking about the possibility of machines or sort of how it either enters that realm. I mean, vulnerability is a human trait, and being able to demonstrate vulnerability in front of your team to say, what, I messed up, or I made a bad decision, or maybe we should have done this way, goes a long way towards modeling that for the team and sort of building that foundation.
Yep. I love that. One of the things you said that really resonated with me, especially with some of the work I'm doing with my private clients now, is this whole notion as you move up the ladder in corporate, where you are no longer responsible for the actual output execution, but you have to get things done through other people. And what happens a lot is a lot of us are these type A achievers where I'm going to do it because I can do it better and faster than anybody else. So I'm just going to do it. And now you have a remit of a large team, and your organizational responsibilities are well beyond what one person can execute. And yet that release of control, personal control, to trust the team that maybe you didn't personally assemble, but they report to you. So now you're responsible for making sure you've got A players in the seats. But that's a tough pivot. And so how did you get over that as you moved up in your career?
Yes, that is a tough pivot, and recalling sort of my most recent experience, so working in a corporate sort of sales environment, is just that is kind of what I call sort of knowledge is power sort of culture. It's like, hey, I was a successful sales rep, and this is how I did it. And if you want to be a successful sales rep, this is how you need to do it. And you need to do it like I did it. And literally listening to a vice president of a division with over 200 folks on a call, like literally doing everything from giving folks like parental advice because like they're a vice president. It's like, I'm not sure that actually enables you to do that, to basically telling people, it's like, well, it's very simple. You just do it this way. And this is how I did it and blah, blah, blah. And that's super alienating. But getting back to a culture, understanding, you made a comment earlier, but what I would always say is if you want to understand the culture, like what is said at the end of a quarter when we're not meeting quota, that's the culture. Because everyone is going to encourage work-life balance and all of those things. But when push comes to shove, like actions speak much louder than what we say or what may be printed in the company handbook.
Yep. Bingo. So we're in the promoted room. I exclusively interview current or former corporate execs, organizational execs, because you've made the climb. And so there is a credibility and relevance to your experience and what my audience is looking for. So as a former executive who was in the room in your organizations making promotion decisions, succession planning decisions, what was it that you were looking for? What contributed in the rooms that you were in to somebody making the cut to somebody who was just going to be left behind and they're going to hang out in their role for the time being?
As I think back towards sort of my role as a vice president, what I was looking for were folks that would be reporting to me, but would have really national presence and a national reputation. And someone, quite honestly, who was really capable of leading at the CIO level for, say, a smaller college. So folks that in many ways had sort of arrived and already sort of knew that their role is to kind of lead in that capacity. So if it's funny, going back to another example from Lencioni, thinking about, I think it was like the ideal team player. I think what he uses, the words humble, hungry, smart. So is someone who doesn't think too highly of themselves, sort of listens rather than speaks. Someone who is driven, but not driven necessarily by personal success, but driven by this concept of how can we do this better? How can we do it faster? How can we do it cheaper? And have that be a mantra of thinking about hungry and being willing and able to take on something new. I think that's one of the things that's really challenging in a organization that's typically focused on like project plans is when you're trying to move change, you're changing people. And as much as we like to sort of lay out plans, they're only so beneficial in that case. I kind of like what I think Eisenhower said, plans are useless, planning is everything.
Mm-hmm.
So really understanding the fact that if we're driving from New York to Los Angeles, we kind of know where we're starting, we kind of know our destination, but how we're going to get there depends on a lot of factors. Even if we have it mapped out, we may run into an accident or a storm or a traffic jam where we have to divert our route. We need to be willing to be able to do that when we're leading change. And I think a lot of times as leaders, being okay with being flexible and recognizing the need to change when it sort of arises. Yeah, which sort of leads to the last one is regarding smart. Some of the most learned people I have with credentials, I would not consider them to be smart. I mean, I think there's a common sense when I think of smart. I think the ability to be able to change your mind, the ability to be able to listen to sort of a counterpoint and say, I never really thought of it that way. The ability to be able to look at things through different lenses.
Yeah. So it's really the coachability. When I think about the rooms I was in throughout the course of my career and the people that we would talk about and kind of green light, yes, they're in line for this next promotion. Agree with everything you said. And really what it boils down to is a risk decision on behalf of the decision makers. Because we don't know how somebody's really going to perform in that role, because we don't know until we're in the role how well any of us are going to perform in the role. And so I like to, I'm very practical and logical. So if I'm listening to this podcast and I'm ambitious and want to know what's the breadcrumb to take away from this, it's find those opportunities where you're going to get not only the experience, but the visibility to show the decision makers who are then in the room exactly what Michael said. Are they coachable? I mean, are they humble and coachable, and are they listening? But can I trust them with this level of responsibility? Have they shown me enough? And so it's really looking for those opportunities to get the stretch experience and the visibility to show the people who are making the decisions, I'm ready, throw me on the field.
Yeah, no, good. Yes. +1 to everything that you said. But the way I looked at it, especially as a vice president, if I was having a conversation with you, you were already qualified to do the job on paper. And you made it through the search committee, you kind of made it through this process. And I would usually okay, I want to see the top 3 candidates. And really, in many ways, and this is where I would sort of rely on my instincts. I know that doesn't probably help your viewers much, but asking open-ended questions and really being very discerning about what am I listening for? Sort of in this question. Yeah, I think in many ways, sort of leading with that intuition. This is the person that I really felt resonated with me. Because to me, there's science behind this concept of resonance, of sort of being able to synchronize with another person's energy. So yeah, I think, and that comes from experience, sort of being in touch with sort of that aspect of sort of what you're looking for, and really looking for someone. There's a lot of criticism about the notion of fit, but to me, I think about fit as a puzzle. Every piece is a different shape. So building a leadership team that's complementary and sort of recognizing the fact that, hey, I need to build some folks around me that see things differently, that actually bring a different skill set.
Yeah. Yeah. And that takes some self-awareness as a hiring manager. You've got to know. Right. So for instance, I know for me, I am a very big picture thinker. I am creative. I think of the big picture. I see the strategy. I know the steps to get there. Where I needed to make sure that I built a team around me were the people who loved the details, because I would gloss over the details. So left to my own devices, things were not going to get done the way. And that took a lot of self-awareness and a lot of vulnerability to admit, I need somebody on my team who loves the project and the management of the project and all the details of the project. So you've got to know as a hiring manager, what's your default? Where do you thrive and come alive? And again, this is a luxury you get as you move up the ladder, where you can start to build a team. When I was an IC or a new manager, I had to just be good at it. I had to figure out and lean into all the discomfort and do the parts of the job I hated because it wasn't natural for me. And then as I grow, you start to your point, build the puzzle around you that ends up being the full picture of bigger execution.
Yeah. As you're talking, Courtney, it reminds me of the same thing. I forgot where this was introduced in one of the leadership things that I attended over the years, but it was really this pie chart. And the pie chart really had 3 components. It was lead, manage, and do. And what I remember, sort of the key learning around that was as you're progressing, those portions of the pie should change significantly. So when you're in a leadership role, you should be leading a substantial amount of that. Maybe 75% of that pie is you leading. And so same thing, I think being able to let go. So as you move from being an individual contributor to a manager, letting go of doing to getting to the point of managing, and then letting go of managing to leading. Because we manage things, we lead people. And getting back, I think, even to your original question, thinking about AI and sort of the advice that I had gotten, leadership should be felt. And so that leadership presence is someone who looks you in the eye when you have that conversation, that can speak clearly, that it doesn't use an abundance of words, but could communicate sort of very complicated concepts very easily. Some of the most intelligent people I've met in my life can take incredibly complicated things and make it very simple.
And this is speaking to you might have the most impressive degree and this glorious pedigree and still not be the person I want to hire, because that does not equal these other things that you're talking about. And so this notion of being able to distill complexity, this idea of eye-to-eye connection with somebody. What's really interesting is of all the people I interview for this podcast, I always ask everybody your thoughts around what is executive presence, because it's a big one and everybody has a different point of view. The theme that carries through all the executives I talk to is executive presence, somebody who's eyeball to eyeball with me, clued in, listening, connected, makes me feel heard, and they're clearly hearing me. And also this ability to distill complexity is another theme that comes up around. We know it when we see it. What is this X factor, this joie de vivre, but nobody can really say it. This is what it is. It is the connection. It is connecting these dots and being able to distill complexity. If I am young in my career and moving up the ladder, this is the stuff I would be paying a lot of attention to.
Yeah, absolutely. The one thing I would add to that regarding sort of emotional intelligence, which is a word that a lot of people hear, and is really understanding what you're feeling. Because our emotions, and you say that you understand this as a coach, our emotions are meant for a reason. But I can only speak from my own perspective, but oftentimes growing up, it's like either there's certain emotions you don't show or there's certain emotions you had this label of good and bad. And so it's like, well, I'm not going to feel whether it's angry or sadness. And I'm certainly not going to let them see me sweat, because the last thing you want to be is sort of embarrassed in front of people, which is so leads to this notion of really wanting to be vulnerable and how difficult that could be for some people. So yeah, I would say for folks that are early on, really understanding, like your emotions are powerful. For example, like the emotion of anger shows when one of our core values are being violated. So understanding why something is making you angry is the key to helping sort of diffuse it, so we don't get emotionally hijacked. And I think that's one of the things that I kind of feel is missing from some of the teachings around emotional intelligence, is actually really even understanding your own emotions, which someone might argue gets more into psychology, but we'll sort of leave that there.
The fact of the matter is we are humans working with other humans in a business environment, but we don't get away from the fact that we are humans working together, which means inherently there is a lot of psychology behind. So we don't get away from it. And we also don't get to divorce ourselves from the fact that we are humans and therefore have emotions. And this is a difficult one for those of us in the business world, because Michael, you said it, never let them see you sweat. I mean, that is how we came up. And I do think that there is some generational differences. The folks coming up early in their careers now, I think, are being brought up with less of that and more just kind of self-authority and agency, which I think is a healthy thing, as long as we still understand that there is an element of reading the room and toggling our approach to be perceived in the way we want to be perceived. So there isn't, I kind of don't love this idea of bring your whole self to work. Be fully authentic in every moment. Not that I advocate for being inauthentic, but I do advocate for the ability to read the room. And I was telling a story earlier about midpoint in my career. I was in a team meeting and my boss was like, we're going to call Courtney our new CFO. And I knew for sure it was not because of my financial prowess, because I've already admitted details are not my thing. She said, Chief Fun Officer. And I immediately bristled because I thought, ooh, am I not coming across as serious enough? Am I not showing that I'm smart and I'm really good at my job? Am I only coming across as this fun gal who likes it? Because I do. I do like to have fun. I always did through my career. And I could have really tough conversations and make tough decisions, right? But I didn't know if I was showing up with the balance. So when I say toggle your approach, what I'm saying is I had to know what rooms I could go into and be my full fun self, and what rooms I went into where I had to lead with my more serious self. All of it was me. So this is not about inauthenticity. It's about the ability to read the room and know how you need to show up to manage how you're being perceived.
That's such a great point. Yeah. So another word I think regarding presence is authenticity. Yeah. And I think same thing, another leadership program that I was in, they use this notion of like, actor on a stage, which I thought was actually very dangerous advice because you're not an actor. You don't
Yeah.
want to be someone else. I think to your
Yeah.
point, I think there's a big difference between self-control and presence. So how I would show up in a board meeting that was broadcast on PBS in the state is going to be different than how I would have a conversation with a student or with student government.
Yeah.
No, so I think it is, and the same thing is knowing that this notion of praise in public, criticize in private, understanding the weight of our words in a meeting, especially if they're directed towards a team member or to somebody, how powerful. I think sometimes that's the other thing, maybe as we're nearing towards the end, is thinking about how much power you have over a person's life when you are their manager.
Oof.
And holding that responsibility like very seriously. Because there's, if I think about, so there's very few things that can make your life more miserable than working for a manager that you don't resonate with. And I think about, get back to our conversation, this was one of the exercises that I always led in one of those classes was I would ask people, think of examples in your life, whether it's a coach or a teacher or a manager that you just didn't resonate with, that you really couldn't stand. Like, how did they make you feel? And write it down and then sort of flip that coin and say, okay, well, where was a coach, a teacher, a leader that you worked with that you would run through a wall for? How did they make you feel? And remind us, like, okay, if you don't take anything else away from this leadership seminar, remember that people inherently know good leadership.
Yeah. And that's a great nugget of practical advice. And this is what helps us be deliberate about our careers when we know ourselves well enough to know when it's time to go and where you really want to plant your roots and thrive. So I think that's great advice. So, Michael, I always like to end my podcast with a book recommendation because I love to read and I'm always looking for the latest, greatest business self-help genre. So what have you got for me? What's your favorite these days?
It's funny, 2 books on that. Yeah, say not recent. I'm reading some sort of non-business stuff now, but early on in the conversation, we were talking about change. And one of the best books that I've read on leading change is a book called Switch by Chip and Dan Heath. So it basically, very briefly, is based on some work that was done at the University of Virginia, where they kind of developed this mental model of sort of the human psyche as a rider and an elephant. That basically the rider is sort of our very rational cognitive self, and the rider is our emotional self. And the concept is that the rider, it thinks it's in control of this 2-ton animal until that 2-ton animal wants to go somewhere different. And so really, the authors do a great job of helping us as leaders understanding like how to reframe things and how to understand how people are feeling about your change emotionally and how to lead change from that perspective. The other book, which is a little more on the spiritual side, is a book called Becoming Supernatural.
Joe Dispenza.
Yeah, so you're familiar. A couple things that I think really resonate with me. So as an engineer, this concept of that energy is in everything. And understanding like there are things that we can't see that are still real. Sort of understanding, elements about sort of ourselves that we can change. So those would be 2 books. I think I'm reading a book about nature. It's a relatively new book, and it's on research that was done about how sort of our brain chemistry and our body changes as we spend time sort of in the wilderness. So, and as you can see behind me, I spend a lot of time in the wilderness these days.
Yeah, beautiful. If you're lucky enough to be in some places beautiful as Michael, that is amazing. I see your doors open with the fresh mountain air. I am dialing in from Florida, where windows are shut tight because it is blazing hot out there and humid. And I do try to go outside every morning in bare feet and stand in my grass because I too have seen the research. There is something powerful about just grounding in nature. And I am a city gal. I'm a New Yorker. And I always have to remember there is a place in nature you can find anywhere. And if you can't, get yourself a house plant and see something green every day, because there is something powerfully grounding about remembering that there is more than the spin of work that just feels all consuming to us at times. So thank you for that reminder.
Yeah, I think that's one of the important things is we are not our title, and we are not what we do professionally. And as a person that's a little more senior in their career and in life, that would be sort of my advice, is to don't lose track of who you are as a person. Don't give away the things that make you passionate about life in order to pursue professional goals.
Yep. And I think you are living proof that you don't have to. You can have both. So, Michael, thank you so much for your time. We have enjoyed having you here in the promotion room.
Thanks, Courtney. Great spending some time with you. Take care.
Thanks for joining me inside the promotion room, and be sure to follow the show so you never miss an episode. Cheers to your success.